Have you ever rushed home with a life-changing check, eager to share the glory with your husband, only to find he and his mother had dug a grave for your future? I stepped onto my porch with $10 million to my name, greeted by divorce papers and a triumphant smirk. They thought I would beg, but never corner a woman holding both brilliance and millions, because she will simply buy your entire life. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories. Our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness will help us pay our hardworking staff so they can cover their living expenses and continue bringing you the best revenge stories. And you can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the video description or comments. My name is Maria Lane, and at 35 years old, I thought I finally had the breakthrough I had been waiting for my entire adult life. I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of a downtown Chicago law firm, the crisp autumn wind biting at my cheeks, but I barely felt the cold. Inside my leather tote bag was a single sheet of paper confirming that I was the sole beneficiary of a $10 million trust. It was an inheritance from an estranged aunt, a woman I had only met a handful of times, but who apparently had been watching from the shadows, quietly admiring the independence and grit I had shown fighting my way through the cutthroat world of biotechnology. Walking toward my car, my mind was racing with a blinding, euphoric light. $10 million. The phrase kept repeating in my head like a prayer. I could not wait to speed home and tell Julian, the man I had shared my life and my struggles with for the past 7 years. This money meant everything. It meant we no longer had to drown under the suffocating weight of our mortgage and crushing student loans. More importantly, it meant I could finally quit my exhausting job at Ethelgard Biosolutions. I could build my own private research laboratory, fund my own clinical trials, and stop being a mere cog in a corporate machine. For the first time in my life, the future looked absolutely limitless. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding against my ribs with pure, unadulterated joy as I navigated the bustling city streets back to our quiet suburban neighborhood. But the moment my tires crunched against the gravel of our driveway, the warm glow in my chest abruptly froze. Julian was standing on the front porch. He was not alone. Standing right beside him was his mother, Eleanor. They were both dressed immaculately, standing stiffly with a defensive, heavily calculated posture that felt completely out of place for a random Tuesday afternoon. There was no welcoming smile on my husband's face. There was no warmth in his eyes. I stepped out of the car, my smile faltering as the heavy silence stretched between us. I walked up the porch steps, expecting a hug or at least an explanation, but Julian did not step forward to greet me. Instead, he coldly extended his hand, thrusting a thick stack of legal documents toward my chest. Beside him, Eleanor stood like a stone statue, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes bore into mine, dripping with a venomous disdain. She was practically holding her breath, eagerly waiting for the exact moment my knees would buckle. I looked down at the papers. My eyes scanned the bold, sterile print at the top. They were divorce papers. Attached to them was a highly aggressive, forced asset division agreement dictating that I pack up my belongings and vacate our home within exactly 7 days. But as my eyes darted across the pages, the legal jargon began to blur until one specific, glaring clause brought my world to a screeching halt. It was a mandate demanding that I immediately and unconditionally surrender all intellectual property rights to the biological compound I had been painstakingly researching at the company for the last 3 years. For 5 excruciating seconds, the world around me completely stopped. The wind died down, the sound of distant traffic faded into nothingness. I stood completely paralyzed, processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal standing right in front of me. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her lips parting as if ready to savor the sound of my weeping, but I did not cry. My vision slowly shifted away from the divorce papers in my hands and drifted down to the leather tote bag resting against my hip, the bag holding $10 million, a quiet, deadly calmness washed over my entire body. I looked back up at Julian, and a slow, completely silent smile began to stretch across my face. It was a smile so deeply unsettling, so utterly devoid of the devastation they had banked on, that I saw Julian instinctively take a half step back, a visible shudder ripping through his shoulders. I calmly folded the thick stack of legal documents, creasing the edges with deliberate precision as if sealing an evidence bag. The panicked confusion in Julian's eyes was almost comical, his grand performance ruined by my lack of tears. I looked him dead in the eye and said exactly one thing. "You will be hearing from my lawyer," without giving them another second to breathe. I turned on my heel and walked straight back to my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror. The smug triumph had vanished from Eleanor's face, replaced by a sudden, frantic whispering as they stood stranded on their own porch. I drove straight to the high-rise office of Victor Vance, a family and corporate attorney whose name was whispered with absolute terror in the Chicago business world. He was a shark, known for stripping deceitful spouses down to their last cent. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk and placed both the fresh divorce papers and my aunt's $10 million trust confirmation side by side before him. Victor put on his reading glasses, his eyes darting across the pages with the calculated focus of a predator. Within minutes, his sharp eyebrows shot up. "This is not a standard divorce, Maria," he murmured, tapping his gold pen against the paper. "They do not care about the suburban house. They barely even care about your joint checking accounts. Look at the language here. This agreement is entirely weaponized to isolate and seize the biological compound formula you have spent the last 3 years developing." His words hit me like a chemical catalyst, instantly making everything clear. My mind began to dissect the last few years of my marriage with the cold, unyielding precision of a scientist examining a deadly pathogen under a microscope. Julian had always insisted on managing our household finances, claiming he wanted to protect me from stress so I could focus entirely on my laboratory research. Now, the anomaly in his behavior was glaring. Over the past 2 years, our shared savings had felt inexplicably stagnant. Despite my high salary, he had been quietly, systematically siphoning off our marital funds. He was feeding a hidden parasitic growth right under my nose, and I had been too blind to see it. Victor took off his glasses and leaned forward, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "If they want to play dirty, we have the ultimate equalizer," he said, nodding toward my inheritance document. "We can unleash a full forensic assault." With the limitless capital of $10 million backing me, I looked at Victor and gave him his directives. "I want a network of the best private investigators and forensic accountants money can buy. Track every single cent Julian and Eleanor have moved over the last 24 months. Dig up every hidden account, every shell company, and every secret meeting." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a frosty whisper. "I want this done with absolute speed, maximum ruthlessness, and total secrecy. They must believe they are robbing a defenseless woman until the very moment the trap snaps shut." Exactly 48 hours later, my phone buzzed with a secure message from Victor Vance. It contained only an address and a time. When I arrived at the discreet, dimly lit conference room deep within his firm, the heavy mahogany table was covered in glossy photographs, banking records, and thick stacks of printed emails. Victor was standing by the window, swirling a glass of scotch, looking more like a general surveying a battlefield than a lawyer. He turned to me, his expression grave, but his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Sit down, Maria," he instructed, his voice low and precise. "What we uncovered is not just infidelity, it is a highly organized, malicious syndicate operating right inside your own home." He slid the first photograph across the polished wood. It showed Julian at a lavish restaurant, his hand resting intimately on the thigh of a woman I had never seen before. She was young, perfectly styled, with sharp features and an aggressive posture even in a candid shot. "Meet Chloe," Victor said, tapping her face with his index finger. "She is a high-level marketing director at a rival pharmaceutical firm. Your husband has been sleeping with her for over a year, but this is not a cliché office romance. They are not just sharing hotel rooms, they are business partners. Victor slid a heavy-bound dossier toward me. The cover page displayed the incorporation documents for a brand new biotechnology startup. I opened it, my eyes scanning the executive summary, and suddenly, the air was violently sucked out of my lungs. My blood turned to ice, printed right there. Under the section detailing the company's revolutionary core product were the exact molecular structures, the specific protein sequencing, and the proprietary synthesis methods of the biological compound I had poured 3 grueling years of my life into creating. "He stole it," I whispered, the horrifying realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. He actually stole my work. Suddenly, fragments of the past year flashed through my mind with sickening clarity. The late nights I had spent hunched over my laptop at our kitchen island, desperately trying to finalize the data. Julian, playing the role of the devoted, caring husband, bringing me cups of hot coffee at 2 in the morning. He would massage my shoulders, asking innocent questions about my progress, telling me to take a break and get some fresh air on the patio. The moment I stepped away, he had been plugging a drive into my machine, quietly draining the lifeblood of my intellect while I blindly trusted him. He had not just violated our marriage bed, he had violated my mind. "It gets worse," Victor said, pulling me back to the cold reality of the conference room. He spread out a complex web of financial flowcharts. "We tracked the missing money from your joint accounts. Julian did not just spend it on expensive dinners with Chloe. He funneled every single stolen cent into a hidden offshore account to serve as initial capital for this startup." Victor then dropped the heaviest blow. He pointed to a massive lump sum wire transfer originating from a local retirement fund. "Your mother-in-law, Eleanor," Victor continued, his tone dripping with disgust. "She liquidated absolutely everything, her entire pension, her savings, her mutual funds. She poured it all into Chloe's company as their primary angel investor. Eleanor is the largest private shareholder. They are planning a massive, industry-disrupting launch event next month. The sheer scale of their depravity was breathtaking. The timing of the divorce was no longer a mystery. It was a tactical strike. By serving me with papers and forcing a rapid, brutal asset division right now, they were legally locking down the marital estate. When the new company launched and exploded in value next month, I would be entirely severed from Julian financially, leaving me with absolutely no legal standing to claim a single penny of the profits generated by my own stolen genius. They wanted to cast me out onto the street, destitute and broken, while they built an empire on the ashes of my hard work. "This is open and shut corporate espionage and severe marital fraud," Victor stated firmly, leaning over the table. "I can draft a massive lawsuit tonight. We file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. We freeze all their assets. We alert the authorities. And we shut this startup down before it even prints its first business card." I stared at the glossy photos, the financial charts, and the stolen diagrams of my compound. A chaotic storm of rage screamed inside my chest, demanding immediate vengeance, but the cold, analytical scientist within me violently seized control. If we sued them now, it would turn into a massive, prolonged legal circus. Julian and Eleanor would immediately scramble. They would hire defense attorneys. They would hide the remaining funds in shell companies. And they would drag me through years of agonizing depositions. The satisfaction of destroying them would be diluted by endless courtroom bureaucracy. "No," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of all emotion. I looked up at Victor, my eyes locking onto his. "If we strike them now, they will only bleed. I do not want them to bleed. Victor, I want them to evaporate." I picked up the document confirming my $10 million inheritance and placed it directly on top of Julian's stolen startup plans. "Do not file any lawsuits. Let them keep thinking they have outsmarted the dumb, isolated scientist," I commanded, a dangerous fire igniting in my chest. "We are going to let them build their magnificent castle. We are going to let them pour every last drop of their money, their hope, and their arrogance into this launch. And while they are looking up at the sky, We are going to use my $10 million to silently buy the ground right out from under them. The next few weeks became a masterclass in psychological manipulation. If Julian and Eleanor wanted to see a broken, defeated woman, I was going to give them an Oscar-worthy performance. During our mandatory divorce mediation sessions, I made sure to look entirely unhinged. I wore oversized sweaters, left my hair unkempt, and deliberately let my hands tremble whenever Julian slid a document across the table. Victor played his part flawlessly. The terrifying shark of the Chicago legal world suddenly transformed into a weary, incompetent attorney who seemed utterly overwhelmed by Julian's aggressive legal counsel. We fought weekly over insignificant assets like the old sedan and the living room furniture, completely ignoring the massive intellectual property theft glaring us in the face. When they pushed the clause demanding I surrender all rights to my research at the company, I put my face in my hands and let out a pathetic sob. I signed the paper with a shaking pen, across the table. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, a sickening grin of absolute victory plastered across his face. He actually thought he had broken me. He had no idea that while I was crying in the mediation room, I was quietly orchestrating his absolute annihilation in the shadows. My first target was the supply chain. Through a highly secure shell corporation constructed by Victor, I utilized exactly $5 million from my hidden inheritance to execute a hostile, yet completely invisible, corporate takeover. I purchased Apex Manufacturing outright. Apex was not just any factory. It was the only specialized biochemical processing facility within a 500-mile radius, equipped with the specific thermal bioreactors required to mass-produce the synthetic compound Julian was trying to steal. By acquiring it under a web of holding companies, my name never appeared on a single public document. I was the ghost in the machine. I now owned the very ground Julian needed to walk on. But the factory was only half the trap. The other half was the science itself. Julian was an arrogant financial manager, not a biochemist. When he snuck into my laptop at 2 a.m, he lacked the fundamental scientific literacy to understand what he was actually stealing. He had downloaded the beta iteration of my formula, an outdated draft I had intentionally abandoned on my old hard drive because it contained a microscopic, deeply embedded molecular flaw. If scaled up for mass production, that specific version of the compound would inevitably destabilize, rendering the entire batch utterly useless and commercially dead. While Julian was busy building a corporate identity around a toxic, defective formula, I walked into the federal patent office and submitted the heavily encrypted, fully perfected version of the compound. I secured the exclusive, airtight patents under my own newly established private laboratory. I held the keys to the kingdom, and Julian was holding a ticking time bomb. Unaware of the slaughter waiting for them, Julian and his mistress, Chloe, marched straight into the jaws of the beast. They approached Apex Manufacturing to secure their production line, acting under my strict, confidential directives. The factory director welcomed them with open arms. He offered them an exclusive, expedited manufacturing contract that seemed too good to be true. Blinded by greed and the rush to launch, Julian and Chloe signed the ironclad agreement. To fund this massive initial production run, they did exactly what I calculated they would do. They dumped every single penny of Eleanor's life savings into the non-refundable deposit, and they recklessly leveraged their new company to secure millions more in high-interest bank loans. They pushed all their chips to the center of the table, betting their entire existence on a hand I had already rigged. As the launch date approached, Eleanor's arrogance reached a fever pitch. My phone would light up late at night with venomous text messages from her. "You always were too weak for my son." One message read, "Do not bother fighting the asset division. Just accept your pathetic fate and find a nice apartment in the slums where you belong." I never replied. I simply sat in the quiet luxury of my temporary penthouse suite, sipping black coffee, taking a screenshot of every single message, and filing them away into a secure digital folder. Every insult was just another nail in her meticulously crafted coffin. Finally, the day arrived to officially close the divorce proceedings. We stood in the stark hallway of the courthouse. The asset division was finalized. Thanks to the bulletproof structure of my aunt's trust and the fact that the inheritance was legally secured before the divorce was even filed, my $10 million remained completely invisible to the court. I was legally severed from Julian, walking away with barely a fraction of our joint savings, just as they had planned. Julian buttoned his designer suit jacket, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "It did not have to be this ugly, Maria," he lied smoothly, checking his expensive watch. "But you have to understand, I am moving on to much bigger things. You just could not keep up." I looked up at him, allowing my face to remain perfectly blank. "Goodbye, Julian," I said softly. I turned and walked out of the courthouse, leaving him completely convinced that he had won the war. He was going to be a millionaire, an industry titan, and a visionary. He had absolutely no idea that he was a dead man walking. The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was a sickening display of unearned opulence. Through the tinted windows of my hired limousine parked directly across the street, I watched the live feed of the launch party on a sleek tablet resting on my lap. The high-definition cameras captured every glittering detail. The ceiling was draped in imported silk, and crystal chandeliers cast a golden, angelic glow over a room filled with the wealthiest venture capitalists in the city. Waiters in pristine white coats glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate appetizers. Right in the center of the madness was Eleanor. She was practically vibrating with arrogance. Swathed in a gaudy emerald evening gown that screamed new money, she was holding court with a group of pharmaceutical executives, laughing loudly, her neck draped in diamonds that were undoubtedly purchased with the very last drops of her drained retirement funds. She looked exactly like a dowager empress who had finally conquered the world, utterly convinced of her own untouchable superiority. Standing near the front of the stage was Chloe, wearing a sharp designer crimson dress, playing the role of the brilliant, untouchable young co-founder. And then, the room dimmed. A single bright spotlight hit the center stage, and Julian confidently walked out to the wooden podium. The sheer level of his delusion was breathtaking. He adjusted the microphone, a slick, highly practiced smile plastered across his face. He looked out at the sea of wealthy investors, completely blind to the heavy guillotine hanging directly over his neck. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice echoing perfectly through the speakers inside my quiet, climate-controlled car. "Tonight, we are not just launching a startup, we are launching a revolution. For years, I have poured my blood, my sweat, and my absolute soul into the laboratory. I sacrificed countless nights to engineer a biological marvel that will fundamentally disrupt the global medical supply chain." I took a slow sip of my chilled, sparkling water. The irony was so rich, it was almost suffocating. The man standing on that stage had never so much as calibrated a laboratory microscope in his entire life. His entire empire, his entire identity at this exact second, was a hollow shell built completely on top of my stolen brilliance. "And tonight," Julian continued, raising his hands in a theatrical gesture of absolute triumph, "I am thrilled to announce that our exclusive production line at Apex Manufacturing is officially online. The portal is now open. We are ready to accept your capital, and together, we will change the world." He reached out and confidently pressed a large, illuminated button on his podium tablet, a ceremonial gesture meant to signal the opening of their investment portal and the initiation of the massive factory production run. The crowd erupted into polite, highly enthusiastic applause. Inside the dark isolation of the limousine, I gently set my glass down. I opened my laptop, brought up the heavily encrypted mail server Victor had prepared, and calmly pressed the enter key. Exactly 5 seconds later, the atmosphere inside the ballroom violently shifted. It started as a subtle ripple. A sharp ping echoed from the front row, then another from the back. Within 10 seconds, a deafening, chaotic symphony of notification chimes exploded across the massive hall. Every single phone, tablet, and smartwatch belonging to the investors in that room lit up simultaneously. I watched through the camera feed as the applause abruptly died. The venture capitalists pulled out their devices, their polite smiles instantly evaporating into expressions of deep, horrified confusion. I knew exactly what they were reading. They had just received a massive, anonymous data dump. The email contained undeniable, side-by-side photographic evidence of the stolen proprietary drafts, the exact dates of the home network server breaches, and most devastatingly, a full chemical analysis proving that the specific formula Julian was trying to mass-produce possessed a catastrophic molecular flaw. The attached legal dossier clearly stated that investing a single cent into this company would immediately entangle them in the largest intellectual property lawsuit of the decade. On stage, the color violently drained from Julian's face. He looked down at his own command tablet. The sleek, customized dashboard he had been showing off suddenly flashed blindingly red. A massive error code consumed the screen. The automated message from the Apex factory network read loud and clear: production indefinitely suspended. Critical intellectual property violation detected. Account frozen. Pure, unfiltered dread took hold of his entire frame. His tailored suit suddenly seemed as restrictive as a tight cage. I watched him frantically tap his finger against the screen, desperately trying to clear the error. When that failed, he hastily pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands trembling so uncontrollably that he almost dropped the device. He dialed the director of Apex Manufacturing. I knew he was making that call because the factory line had been given strict instructions to route all of his frantic attempts straight to an inactive, disconnected voicemail box. "Hello, pick up. Damn it. Please pick up," Julian muttered into the microphone, completely forgetting it was still broadcasting his trembling, pathetic voice to the entire room. The ballroom was now in total chaos. Investors were actively shouting, shoving their phones in Chloe's face, aggressively demanding answers. The wealthy elites who were ready to write checks for millions of dollars just 3 minutes ago were now violently backing away toward the exit doors, as if Julian were infected with a highly contagious plague. Eleanor violently pushed her way through the panicked crowd, her emerald gown catching on the edges of the seating arrangements. She scrambled up the steps to the stage, her expensive diamond necklace swinging wildly against her chest. "Julian!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unfiltered terror. "Julian, what is happening? Why is the system down? Why is everyone leaving us?" Julian could not answer her. He was hyperventilating, staring at his frozen tablet with wide, dead eyes, the realization of his doom finally sinking into his bones. And then, the final stroke of the masterpiece was painted. The massive oak double doors at the back of the ballroom were violently thrown open. The ambient hotel music was instantly cut off. A heavily armed squad of men and women in dark suits, flanked by uniformed police officers, marched directly into the center of the room. Their silver badges caught the sharp glare of the crystal chandeliers. "Julian Lane," the lead detective's voice boomed over the chaos. "Absolute and completely uncompromising. Economic Crimes Division, step away from the podium right now. We have a federal warrant for your immediate summons on multiple counts of severe investor fraud, wire fraud, and the malicious misappropriation of financial assets." From the quiet, untouchable sanctuary of my limousine, I watched Eleanor's knees finally buckle, her agonizing scream completely drowned out by the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. I slowly closed my laptop. The storm had finally broken, and they had absolutely nowhere to run. The morning after the disastrous launch, the air inside Julian's newly leased executive office was thick with the suffocating stench of panic. I pushed open the heavy glass doors without knocking, accompanied by Victor. Julian was slumped over his desk, his eyes bloodshot, clutching his hair. Eleanor was pacing the floor, her face pale and drawn, while Chloe stood as far away from them as possible, furiously typing on her phone. They all froze when I walked in. Julian looked up, his jaw tightening. "Maria, what the hell are you doing here? I am dealing with an absolute catastrophe. Get out." I did not leave. Instead, I walked directly to the head of the conference table and took a seat. Victor stood calmly behind me, placing a sleek leather folder on the polished wood. I am not here as your ex-wife. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. I am here as the chairman of the board and sole owner of Apex Manufacturing. I am your biggest creditor. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stared at me, his brain unable to process the words. Eleanor stopped pacing, her mouth hanging open. That is impossible, Julian stammered, his hands shaking. Apex is owned by a private holding firm. A firm I established exactly 1 week after you handed me those divorce papers, I replied, leaning forward. You see, Julian, the very same afternoon you and your mother ambushed me on the porch, I had just walked out of a law firm. I was carrying a check for $10 million, an inheritance from my late aunt. You tried to throw me out on the street to protect your stolen empire, but instead, you gave me the ultimate freedom to buy the factory you desperately needed. Julian's face drained of all remaining color. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. You did not just steal my work. Julian, I continued, savoring every single syllable. You stole a defective, completely unstable beta draft that I purposely left on that old hard drive because of your catastrophic intellectual property violation. You triggered the penalty clauses in the contract you so eagerly signed with my factory. Your company now owes Apex Manufacturing millions of dollars in breach of contract damages. Eleanor let out a choked gasp, her knees finally giving out. She collapsed into a nearby leather chair, clutching her chest. My money, she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. My retirement. It is all gone. The bank loans. Yes, Eleanor, Victor chimed in smoothly. And since your son leveraged everything, the bank will be foreclosing on your home to cover the outstanding debts. You will be completely bankrupt by the end of the week. At that exact moment, Chloe snapped her phone shut. She looked at Julian with pure venom. I had nothing to do with the theft. He told me he created the formula himself. I am going straight to the authorities to testify against him for full immunity. Without another word, she turned on her heel and sprinted out of the office, leaving Julian completely isolated to face the impending federal investor fraud charges. Julian looked like a broken, hollow shell. He stared at me, tears of pure defeat spilling down his cheeks. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I reached into the folder, pulled out a final legal document, and slid it across the table toward him. This is a total asset liquidation agreement, I stated coldly. You and your mother will sign over every single remaining asset you possess to me, right now. Your cars, the remaining cash in your personal accounts, the equity in her house. In exchange, I will drop the criminal corporate espionage charges against you. You will still have to face the wrath of the investors and the federal fraud division, but at least you will not have me adding an extra 20 years to your prison sentence. Julian picked up the pen with a trembling hand. He did not read the terms, he just signed his name, surrendering his entire life to the woman he thought he had destroyed. Eleanor wept silently, too broken to even argue as she signed her name next to his. I gathered the papers, stood up, and walked out of the office without looking back. When I pushed through the revolving doors of the lobby, the bright, glorious Chicago sun washed over me. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The heavy chains of the past 7 years were finally broken. I stepped into my waiting car and gave the driver the address to my newly constructed, state-of-the-art private research facility. Julian and Eleanor had lost absolutely everything, but as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew my empire was just beginning. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for staying with us until the very end of this story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please leave your city and country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's journey of justice and revenge, we kindly ask you to help us keep this channel alive by donating just $1 through the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by using the link in the description and comments. You provide our hardworking staff with the means to support their families and continue creating the high-quality revenge stories you love. We appreciate your incredible support, and we will see you in the next story.